ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Please sit down. At the outset, let me express my appreciation to Mayor Pete Wilson and the fine people of San Diego for the very warm welcome. We are seeing a great human tragedy as untold numbers of Vietnamese flee the North Vietnamese onslaught. The United States has been doing and will continue to do its utmost to assist these people.
It all began on March 10th, less than a month ago, with a North Vietnamese attack in the Central Highlands. 3 days later, President Thieu ordered withdrawal from the highlands, and refugees began flowing east toward the sea. The following week, 6 provinces fell to the North Vietnamese. One was in the north. The next week, only last week, 3 more northern provinces fell, and with them the ancient and beautiful, once beautiful city of Hue. In the south, another province fell. By the end of last week, the government withdrawal was a rout.
For the Saigon government, the news from nearly every corner of the country is bad. And the events here, not more than 25 miles from the capital, are a microcosm of what's happening throughout South Vietnam, which is to say, Saigon's enemies are pressuring Saigon's troops into pulling back on every front. The Central Highlands now belongs to Saigon's enemies. Hue and the Northern Territories are tottering. Tay Ninh is under siege. The area around Saigon is secure, but that's about all. This is Jim Giggins, ABC News, on the Saigon-Tay Ninh Road.
I was born in Saigon in the fall of 1974. I'm told I was found on the street wrapped in a blanket. I was eventually taken to an orphanage run by Friends for All Children. In place of a birth certificate, I have a court order from South Vietnam declaring me to have been born on October 30th, 1974. During the time of the rapid fall of South Vietnam, Rosemary Taylor, the head of Friends for All Children, lobbied the U.S. government for the evacuation of orphans.
Mr. Ford announced an airlift to the United States from Vietnam.
I have directed that money from a $2 million special foreign aid children's fund be made available. I have also directed American officials in Saigon to act immediately. I have directed that C-5A aircraft and other aircraft especially equipped to care for these orphans during the flight be sent to Saigon. I expect these flights to begin within the next 36 to 48 hours.
My paperwork was prepared and I was placed on a plane and flown out to my family. My parents both grew up in New York City. They moved to Irvine where my dad worked for Hughes Aircraft. He was sent to Europe to work on a project for the Danish military. I had an older brother and an older sister. Eventually, my family adopted my younger brother from Colombia. We moved to Rome for 4 years while my dad worked for the World Food Program. Then we returned to the United States. I had a typical Orange County childhood. In 1985, my parents adopted a brother and sister from Korea, and in 1988, my youngest brother arrived from Jamaica. I graduated from UCSD. In May of 2000, Steve and I got married. In April of 2003, we welcomed our son, Gabriel, and we were soon ready to start our adoption journey.
What was once a simple process has become a long and complex journey. Typically, it goes something like this. The first thing that you need to do is to select an adoption agency and choose a country. There is an application to fill out and a fee to pay. You'll attend educational classes about raising an adopted child. A home study is done by a licensed social worker to ensure that your home is a safe environment for a child. This includes numerous interviews and a psychological evaluation. They'll scrutinize your medical records, bank statements, tax returns, birth certificates, marriage license, references, employment, and family history. And you'll fill out more paperwork so the government can determine if you'll make a good parent. And of course, you'll need to get your passports. There's fingerprinting and an FBI background check. These records are notarized, authenticated, and translated. All of this paperwork is sent to the foreign government for approval in a large packet called the dossier. Then comes the magical moment when the country matches you to a child. This is called a referral and includes a photo, medical records, and information about the child's history. Next, you'll fill out more forms so that the U.S. can evaluate whether or not this child qualifies to be adopted. All of this paperwork is then reviewed by multiple agencies in both countries. This step takes months, and in some cases, years to complete. If approved, it's time to travel. You'll meet your child and finalize your adoption. Before you travel home, your child will need a passport from the birth country and a U.S. visa. Back in the States, you may need to apply for a certificate of citizenship, take a trip to probate court to refinalize your adoption in the U.S., obtain a U.S. birth certificate, and submit multiple follow-up reports with your agency and your child's country of birth. With a process this complex, even the smallest misstep can leave a child stranded for years without a family.
We received our referral on October 7th, 2007. We had all of our papers in order and fully expected to be home with our child by Thanksgiving. Then our world changed.
Allegations of a black market where babies are bought and sold. U.S. diplomats in Vietnam say mothers are being paid to put their children into orphanages.
Mothers are being offered money to put their kids into orphanages, and they're not being told that later on those children will be put up for adoption. So baby selling is the first term that comes to mind to me.
The Vietnamese government describes the report as distorted and slanderous, denying there's baby selling. This government-employed orphanage director agrees.
I do not believe in the allegations because the procedures of adopting a child in Vietnam is very strict.
We waited months only to be told by the State Department that the child would not be issued a visa. While we were waiting, southern China and northern Vietnam suffered one of the worst winters in history. Our child was hospitalized with a severe illness. She didn't recover and instead suffered severe neurological problems. Now she was not qualified for adoption, and we weren't qualified to adopt her. We couldn't fight both determinations. We were given another referral. This time, the very adoption system indicted by our government actually worked. The mother changed her mind and was reunited with her daughter. We received our final referral on the last possible day. There would be no further adoptions allowed by Americans after September 1st, 2008. Unfortunately, we were told a few weeks later that the child had passed away. We were devastated, and while Don wanted to continue, I was done. And then I remembered.
Good evening. In South Vietnam today, a ghastly chapter was added to the pathos of war that has gripped that country for the past 30 years. A huge C-5 Air Force cargo plane carrying 243 South Vietnamese orphans to the United States, the first in the government-ordered airlift, crashed in a rice paddy near Saigon just minutes after takeoff.
The orphans airlift was considered a victory over red tape. It took an order from President Ford to dispatch the C-5A to Saigon. Then the agreement of Vietnamese authorities to expedite passports and exit visas for the orphans. Some of those put aboard the plane had been born only weeks ago. Most seemed to be between the ages of 2 and 8. Some sat along the side of the plane. Others were strapped to the floor, more terrified of the television lights than their first trip in an airplane. Wives of American officials being evacuated home with their own children agreed to act as chaperones to the orphans. Destination, the West Coast, and then onward to American families who had already begun the adoption process.
2 hours ago, I watched this airplane take off from Tan Son Nhut Air Base. It was a perfect takeoff, carrying those orphans to the United States. What can one say except, when will the misery in this country ever stop? The huge plane crashed into a field about 5 miles from the end of the runway, near a small village in Gia Dinh province. There were pieces of wreckage scattered across a half a mile of rice paddy. A fire was slowly burning itself out near the engines. Smashed bodies or parts of them were uncovered by Vietnamese Air Force crews and American officials who rushed to the scene. It was like a combat operation. Helicopters hovered overhead. Body bags were used to remove corpses for identification purposes. Scores of ambulances rushed survivors to a nearby hospital. Some of the chaperones were in a state of shock. Moments before, they had been happy to be leaving Saigon.
My in-laws had 2 children they were to adopt aboard this plane. Both were killed in the crash, and my in-laws were faced with the same decision. Don was flown out to them on the last plane to leave South Vietnam on April 24th, 1975. We continued, this time in the South Korea program. We went to Scottsdale for a weekend of classes. When we returned, Don went to Chula Vista Federal Building to change all of our paperwork over to South Korea. That very night, we received an email. The U.S. and Vietnamese governments would make 28 exceptions. We received the referral, the visa approval, and then dropped everything to fly to Vietnam.
Rosie, are you stuck? It's a video. It's not. Okay. Let me.
Bluebirds fly, and the dreams that you dream of, dreams really do come true. Someday you wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like lemon drops, high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow.
Hi.
Bluebirds fly.
Just jumping.
Dream that you dare to, oh why can't I? Oh, someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like a lemon drops, high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere.
No, worry if you need it. Daddy, what do you think about that? Daddy.
Dreams that you dare to, why